Welcome, and thank you for joining us today to learn more about acquiring and inviting the public to engage with James Baldwin's collection at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. I'm joined by Tulani Salahu-Din. We'll also be talking about Baldwin's life and work, Tulani's work as well, and the Transcription Center and how volunteers are making Smithsonian collections more available and accessible. First, let me briefly introduce Tulani Salahu-Din. She is a researcher and author. She's also responsible for acquiring and interpreting James Baldwin's collection, and we'll hear so much about that today from her. And we are very grateful for you sharing your time with us.
Oh, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
My name is Megan Ferreter, and I'm the project coordinator for the Smithsonian Transcription Center. You may have already worked on collections in the Transcription Center, but if you haven't, I'll give you a brief introduction below. I'd first like to tell you that you can tweet at NMAAHC today. If you have questions, you can also tweet at TranscribeSI. And as we go through, we'll be showing that slide that gives you some of that information. If you'd like to live tweet what we're talking about, you can use the hashtag BaldwinHT. So the Transcription Center is a website. It's accessible 24 hours a day, and we have many different types of collections available. We ask the public to come and help us transcribe these items to make them more useful for researchers and the public alike. You can participate in projects that are focused on science, art, history, and culture. You might work on artist letters, diaries of innovators, scientists' field notes, and if you're lucky, make a few discoveries along the way. Today, we're focusing on James Baldwin's collection, which was in the Transcription Center in July. We launched it on July 8th, and it was completely transcribed by 43 volunteers. That's 124 pages, completely transcribed and reviewed in only about 19 days, which is fantastic. And our volunteers came from around the world. I've written down some of their locations so I could share with you. They came from Washington, D.C., Alexandria, Virginia, and Arlington, Virginia, so local to us here in Washington, D.C., from Chicago, from Châlons-en-Champagne in France, Auckland, New Zealand, Ossing, New York, Los Angeles, O'Hara Township, Pennsylvania, Crèvecoeur, Missouri, Moscow, Austin, Texas, and many more places. So today, as we said, we're going to explore James Baldwin's collection, his work, his life, and how some of the personal effects and items from his collection are being used in the inaugural exhibit at Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, which I may refer to today as the museum. And if you have questions, again, please tweet or email at transcribe@si.edu, and you can tweet at NMAAHC with your questions. So first, let's start. Tulani, if you would please tell us more about yourself and your role at the museum.
Okay, I started working with the museum in 2010 as a researcher. My primary responsibilities have been to develop academic content and to develop, to collect objects for the inaugural exhibition. And that has really taken me all across the country because the museum, as you know, is national in scope. And so I was absolutely excited to be charged with the responsibility of collecting items associated with the writer and activist James Baldwin.
What were some of the places that you went on your collections for creating the inaugural exhibition?
Oh my goodness. On the East Coast, from New York to Florida and several states in between, Los Angeles, San Francisco, St. Louis, let me see, Oklahoma, Tulsa to be specific. So yes.
That's wonderful. Would you tell
Chicago,
us more?
let's not forget
Chicago. Don't forget Chicago. Would you tell us more about your areas of expertise and research that you've been doing since you've been here at the museum?
Since I've been here with the museum, I have focused on African American literature. But I've also had to expand my horizons a bit and go beyond my area of training to collect items associated with African American organizations and institutions. I've been working primarily on the Making a Way Gallery, which is a gallery that examines the historically Black organizations and institutions that really have been responsible for African American survival and progress. So we looked at the sororities and fraternities, for example, in that particular gallery. We look at the HBCUs, historically Black university and colleges. We look at the Black press. We look at entrepreneurship, so those individuals and their businesses, primarily during the early 20th century.
Okay. And this will be an inaugural exhibition within the museum, which is not yet open. Could you give our viewers a little bit of detail about when that might be the opportunity to come and visit in person?
Oh, yes. The museum is slated to open in the fall of next year, 2016, here on the National Mall. Dynamic building, which is situated right beside the Washington Monuments and beside the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History.
And I'd also like to tell our viewers that you can become involved in helping support the museum during its construction phase and getting updates, so you can check in with the website as well as with the National Museum of African American History and Culture's Twitter account and other social spaces. You'll find more details about that. So would you like to tell us a little bit now about James Baldwin and acquiring the collection?
Okay, so a little bit about Baldwin. We all know that he was a writer as well as a civil rights activist. He was born in Harlem in 1924, but at the age of 24, around 1948, he left the United States to go live in France. He was, like many of the other expatriates during the 1900s, some even as early as the late 1800s. They left the United States because of racial discrimination. They were seeking artistic and intellectual freedom in other places throughout Europe, and many did go to France. So there was a precedent, for his travels as early as Ira Aldridge, who left the United States and went to study theater in London. So Baldwin spent a great deal of time in Paris, but then he also spent an entire decade in Turkey, roughly from 1961 to 1971. He spent time there. And Baldwin did develop a great deal of psychological distance that enabled him to examine himself, first as a human being, then as an artist, and to discover what his role was on the world stage, and as well as within the United States. During his tenure abroad, he did venture back home often to participate in the civil rights movement. He was often invited by civil rights leaders to participate in marches and hearings and things of that nature.
Right. So if you're viewing today, you can look in the Google Hangouts link or the YouTube description, and you'll see the project link in the Transcription Center. So some of our volunteers who have transcribed these items are familiar with examples of his movements internationally, writing to his family, receiving letters from people including Julian Bond, recently deceased, as he was working and sharing his work and his struggles with his work, and also distance and the development of ideas of his place in Europe versus in the United States. So I'm going to go ahead and share some of the images from the collection, and this maybe we can start talking a little bit about how you acquired the collection.
Okay.
We're going to put this up here and make sure that we've got this shared with everyone. And again, you'll see the slide here that lets you share your questions with us on social media or share what you're learning. First, we're taking a look at Baldwin with his sister, right?
Okay, yes, this is a relevant photograph to begin with, because the 61 items in the Baldwin collection here were donated to us by James Baldwin's younger sister, Paula Baldwin Whaley. And this is an image of the two of them. They were very, very close. Paula is a visual artist herself. She's a resident of Baltimore, Maryland. So as I often do, as I began to try to identify objects associated with a certain individual that we want to feature, I contact relatives. So I had to, so I reached out to the Baldwin family. Well, my strategy was to reach out to the Baldwin family. And I'm thinking that, all the relatives are probably in New York. But then I found out that there was a Paula Baldwin in Baltimore, and it turns out that she lives 15 minutes away from me.
Oh, wow.
So it was really tremendous. I called her right away, and she graciously invited me into her home and showed me the collection. I had 2 site visits with her. And from those 2 visits, we were able to acquire 61 items. Most of these are paper items. There's one wonderful 3D item, which is I think Baldwin used this as a paperweight. We call it an Inkwell. And I actually saw a photograph. We have a photograph in which this paperweight is shown. He used to keep it on the mantle inside his house in St. Paul de Vence in France, which is where he spent a great deal of his time. And he had a writing studio there. And so it was in this room within his writing studio, that we collected this particular item. And in fact, about half of the items in the collection came directly from his house in France.
Oh, wow.
Place he called his torture chamber.
As any writer knows.
Yes, absolutely. The struggle of writing. Yes, it's not easy.
And I think he reflects on that in some of the items that volunteers will have transcribed as well.
Yeah.
The struggle of releasing words from inside when you want to express something can be a challenge.
Yes. He said that he spent the first 2 years that his first 2 years in Paris, he said he spent as much time balling up paper and throwing it on the floor as he did writing.
Oh, wow. We'll take a look at the outside and then the interior of his passport.
Yes, this is from 1965. This was, if you see the inside, we'll see some stamps from Turkey because he was traveling back and forth from Turkey to the United States and around the world.
When was he so he began living for 10 years in Turkey. Did he make a transition immediately into living in Turkey, or did he move back and forth and then decide to reside there?
Yes, he was in Paris prior to that. I'm not certain if he was going back and forth or not. I know he was, cultivating, after a certain period of time, he was cultivating friendships with people from different countries. Right. So I wouldn't be surprised if he had, made some trips back and forth prior to actually staying there.
Mm-hmm. And I think you described to me that this item is representative of not only of his true international movement, the actual movement, but also creating that psychological distance.
Yes.
And seeking artistic freedom.
Yes, seeking artistic freedom, and as I indicated, many of the artists of his period, Josephine Baker and Buford Delaney, who was actually a mentor of James Baldwin, a very dear friend and mentor. He was originally from New York as well, and he spent most of his time in France. And one of the items in our exhibition is a graphic image of a painting of James Baldwin that was done by Buford Delaney. Wow. Buford Delaney painted Baldwin several times. Mm-hmm.
Let's move on to this badge. And also, if you would describe to us as we're moving through these images, if and how they are represented in the Making Away.
Yes, this badge is represented in the Making Away gallery. This was from 1968. And this is an example of the wonderful research, that interns here can do. Sometimes we get an object, and this is all we know about it, is what we see initially. So I got this pass. As you can see, there's no date, no location in terms of the country or the city. So I was able to take this badge and find out that it was in 1965 that Baldwin was asked to come and serve as the keynote speaker at the World Council of Churches Assembly in Sweden. And actually, Martin Luther King had been invited to speak, and I think it was right after his assassination. So James Baldwin came in his stead. And the topic was the liberation of South Africa.
And unfortunately, that discussion continued for many more years after that.
Many years after that. This is a manuscript of James Baldwin's up just above my head. And it was his sixth novel, published in 1979. So we're very happy to get this manuscript. As we know, Baldwin wrote in various genres. He was a novelist, an essayist, and few people know that he even tried his hand at poetry.
I was going to say, I think we have maybe in some ways overrepresented his poetry in the Transcription Center project.
Yes, you will see some of his personal poetry. I don't believe any of it was ever published, but he did write some poetry.
That's right.
And this is an example right here. This one was written to his sister Paula on her birthday. And we have here
this letter.
This is a letter, yes, and this one happens to be dated. He didn't date all of his letters, but I was glad to see that this particular one was dated. And many of his letters make reference to the publication of his works. This one makes reference to, well, he says that he's in the middle of my hardest book. He said, but you will say that I always say that. And writers do feel that way. Everything is the hardest. And he says, and it's always true. And then he indicates that he has another book in his head that's kicking his behind. He said, so pray for me.
I was going to ask, I think, isn't that what many authors say? This is the hardest. And then you have selective memory when it's done and you start all over again.
Absolutely. So this one, he actually is written to his mother. This is addressed to his mother. He was very close to his family. Many letters to his sister, to his brother David, postcards to his mother during his initial travels to France.
In the 61 items, how many items would you say are that kind of direct correspondence to family that's been retained?
Maybe 10.
Okay. Now a letter to his brother.
Letter to his brother. I thought this letter was very interesting, and I wanted to share it. He talks about beginning his work on his book, Bill Street. If Bill Street Could Talk. He also mentions Another Country. And a book that I don't think was ever published, The Life and Times of the Great Sir Shine. And if that's a published work that you are aware of, please let me know.
Yeah, please tweet us or send us a message if you know that's a published work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's it about this letter.
It's very interesting to be able to see him really writing about his process, his artistic process. I think we know a lot about many authors, but in their personal correspondence, they might not have written as much about the struggle with their work, or maybe the multitasking on many different works at the same time as well.
Yes, and he makes reference here to screenplays and how he can write screenplays very easily. He says, between you and me, with one hand tied behind my back.
That's multi-talented. I found this letter very intriguing, hearing about asking if he could make a dedication.
Yes, he wanted to dedicate this book to his brother David Baldwin, but he asked his opinion and says maybe he should even ask his mother about it. But he says he wants to, would he object to the dedication for David Baldwin, the father and the son? So we could interpret that a couple different ways. But I'll let you ponder on that a bit. He says he knows what he means by it, but he doesn't say specifically here.
Right. And this next image is fascinating to see Baldwin in his working space.
This is the inside of the house that I mentioned in St. Paul de Vence in the south of France. That's his work table. It's his typewriter there. We tried to obtain that typewriter, but we have not been successful to date. I think that's something the family wanted to hold on to. We see in the background there a painting. I was wondering who the artist was, and I found out that was Buford Delaney's painting of Baldwin. One of several, as I had mentioned before. But this is the inside of the torture chamber.
And is that paperweight Inkwell in this photo?
It's not in this particular one, but
I didn't see it, but I didn't know.
You see the mantle right there. I have a photo. Yes, it lived on that mantle at one point.
All right, and I think we have just one more image of one of the physical items, but this is a very powerful image.
Yes, you know, we recently lost the great civil rights leader, Julian Bond. This was a letter from Julian Bond to James Baldwin in 1964, asking him to participate in a hearing here in Washington about civil rights injustices in Mississippi. And I do believe he obliged James Baldwin. I mean, Julian Bond.
So we're going to.
So this, you know, this is an excellent example, you know, that connects Baldwin, even though he was abroad, to civil rights activities at home.
And there are, you know, any Google search or researching into Baldwin will surface images of him at different locations interacting with various leaders in the civil rights movement, as well as in other contexts, as well as interacting with artists from many genres, actors, authors, visual artists as well. And I know that today we probably have participants who are here with us, hoping to learn more about Baldwin, who are being brought forward with many interests as well. We have people who were interested in him as representative of LGBTQ history, those who are interested in his work, those who see the influence of his work continuing today and the importance of many of the themes that he surfaced in his writing, as well as this interconnection and activity with civil rights work in the United States in the 20th century.
Yes. Baldwin wrote from a very, very personal standpoint, but his personal experience, he really explored the regions, various regions of his personal experience, and these connected to national and international concerns, whether he intended them to or not. They just did. In Giovanni's Room, for example, he did explore the issue of homosexuality. And I read an interview in which he said that that work focuses solely on the issue of sexuality rather than the other issues related to white supremacy and the impact of white supremacy on African Americans, because he said both subjects are so weighty and that he could only deal with, you know, that subject in one book.
That's very interesting. So I would like to know, just as a personal opinion, what are some of the things that you find most compelling about James Baldwin? And when you had the opportunity to interact with his physical objects, the personal collections, which things maybe surprisingly moved you more in your interpretation?
Mm-hmm. Well, what I find most compelling about James Baldwin is that he wrote directly from the heart about the pains and struggles of being human, and how that struggle was complicated by issues of race and sexual discrimination. And he wrote through an unfiltered lens. You know, African Americans, leaders and public figures, we often have to speak in a way, in a language, in a softened language, because we're trying to keep in mind a particular audience. And we don't want to offend, we don't want to be misinterpreted. But sometimes, writers have to just speak directly from the heart with all honesty, and not be so concerned with audience first and foremost. And so, Baldwin was someone who felt like, what do I have to lose? Right. What do African American people have to lose? So that's what I admire most about him. Mm-hmm. And we see today in the works of some very progressive writers who are influenced by Baldwin, that same kind of sensibility. Right. Ta-Nehisi Coates, for example, just released a new book, Between the World and Me, in which he very candidly addresses the issue of white supremacy and its impact on individuals, particularly the aspect of violence, the historical violence, the present day violence. And Toni Morrison recommended his book. She says it's required reading. And she said that she had been wondering who would fill the intellectual void in our time. And she said that Ta-Nehisi Coates is that person. And Ta-Nehisi said that he was directly inspired by James Baldwin's Fire the Next Time in creating this publication. And he said not so much by the content, which surprised me, but more so the form. In a very recent interview, he said the form. His book, Between the World and Me, is written as a letter to his 15-year-old son. The Fire the Next Time, Baldwin wrote as a letter to his teenage nephew. So he liked that letter form, and then just the format of personal narrative. So he was definitely inspired by that. But it would seem too that he's influenced by the candor of Baldwin's writing.
And speaking in that personal voice drives at the heart of issues in a way that, as you just mentioned, you're able to move past the notion of audience when you're speaking to a specific audience, speaking from a personal perspective. Yes. Well, I was going to ask you, where do we see his impact today? And we see that as well. Yeah. But also in some of his other people who were other authors or maybe other artists who were influenced by Baldwin. Do you have any other contemporary artists or authors that you think have also represented some of his style?
I think Baldwin, I can't say anyone specifically is not coming to mind right now, but I think Baldwin, like Malcolm X, just influenced a lot of Black nationalist thinkers, and just young thinkers and writers and artists of our time who take a little bit from each of those leaders, leaders who speak courageously, boldly, without apology, without compromise. So, yeah, I think there are a number out there.
This is changing the subject just a little bit, but thinking through the lens of the way that he wrote, I know that he grew up in a very religious household, and then at a certain point felt he moved away from that, but still made many appeals and used some evocative language that called up religious themes, or, for example, even asking his family members to pray for him.
Yes. Because, he started out, he was a child preacher.
That's right.
A young teen preacher, at least from the age of 14 until 17. He was preaching in Harlem. And so that never leaves you. So that, that was integrated in his writings as well.
Which ways do you think we underestimate his influence?
Underestimate.
Yeah.
I'm not certain. Underestimate.
Probably in many of the.
I don't know. Yeah. I'm not certain. He's read, in colleges, universities, high schools, but I'm not certain to what degree.
Right.
So he may well be underappreciated.
Would you tell us a little bit more about the way his collection and the items that you acquired relate to some of the other upcoming galleries, exhibits, and also things that can be seen currently at the Smithsonian?
Oh, well, I will say that one of his playbills, Blues for Mr. Charlie, which was written not as an immediate response, but it was written as a response to the killing of Emmett Till in 1955. It came years later in 1964, and he dedicated it to the 4 girls who were killed in the Birmingham bombing, and to Emmett Till. And this piece was in our Lens exhibition. And the Lens exhibition was held in our space at the American History Museum. This is a space we have until our museum opens. And it gave visitors a glimpse into the kinds of artifacts and recordings that they will see once the museum opens here.
And am I correct that that is going to be a published volume, or is be a volume that's made based on that gallery?
I'm not certain, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is, but I can't say for sure.
Sure. So when we look forward to other elements in the Making Away gallery, what are some of the items and art and personal effects of, as you mentioned, entrepreneurship, fraternities and sororities, and many other.
There's, in addition to those areas that I mentioned, entrepreneurship, business, religion, education, and the Black press, there's also a section on activism. And so that's where Baldwin is featured, in the activism section. And there are multiple exhibit elements that come together to create an engaging display. I know there's a media piece, which includes footage from 2 films associated with Baldwin. And one is a film, and everyone would love this piece. It's footage of him in Turkey, actually. Sadat Pakay was the filmmaker, and he spent time with Baldwin while he was in Turkey. So we see Baldwin walking through the marketplace, walking among the people there, going into the area where the books are displayed, and he actually finds one of his books, Another Country, among all these books, and he holds it up for the camera. Of course, it doesn't say Another Country, but we had to translate it because it's in Turkish. So, that's a part of that media piece. There's also a clip of him in San Francisco talking to young people. And in that particular clip, he's talking to the young people about their potential. And in doing so, he predicts that there will one day be an African American president. But he makes the point that that's not really the important message that I'm trying to give to you. The important message that I'm trying to give to you is that you have the potential to be that, even if we never have one. You have the potential within yourself to be the president or anything that you want to be as a human being. And of course, that's such a critical message to young African American people who are constantly bombarded with images and messages that tell them that they can't achieve and that they're less than what they are as human beings. So that's there. You saw the passport, the letter. Yeah, so there are 5 of the objects from the collection. There are wonderful photographs as well of his civil rights protest activities. So we see him on the streets.
Would you tell us a little bit about the challenge of selecting items and kind of making a decision about what to include? Because I'm sure you wanted to include everything as well as a typewriter.
Yes.
In the quiet.
We wanted to include a lot, but when you're creating an exhibit, you're under space constraints. And so you have to think about space, you have to think about the central theme. And so not every object is going to support the central theme. So that's how you begin to determine what goes and what doesn't go.
In some of our other hangouts with our volunteers and collection managers and curators, we've learned about some of the preservation process. Did any of Baldwin's collection have to have conservation or preservation activity around it?
I don't think so. Much of it was paper. And I think that that galley proof, that may need some stabilization. But that's the only thing that comes to mind.
Interesting. Well, we are going to move on to some questions from our viewers, but stay tuned because we're going to share a little bit about maybe some future items in the Transcription Center that you'll be able to contribute to that will also be in the Making Away gallery.
Great.
So we've had some questions from volunteers regarding the background and the history of the collection. I know that we had some questions from some volunteers who actually worked on the project, the Transcription Center project. And remember, if you have not tried transcribing items with us in the Transcription Center, you're welcome to join us. This particular collection had 124 pieces, and we saw things including playbills in Turkish and other items about representing his work beyond his letters. When you were speaking with his sister, Paula Baldwin Whaley, which elements did she hope that you would bring forward into the collection? Did she suggest?
No, she didn't express a preference at all. She was just happy to be able to, to donate these things and to for us to be able to use them in the inaugural exhibition or for publications or for online presentations. So
that's really wonderful to hear. One of the things that we would like to share with you as viewers is that you can download the PDF of the entire project of the Baldwin collection that's in the Smithsonian Transcription Center, and then you can use that in your teaching space for your personal research, personal reading. It's an opportunity to interact and engage with his letters in digitized format rather than the select items that will be present in the gallery. And actually, we have a question. Where does the name Making Away come from?
Oh, Making a Way Out of No Way. That's the full title, derived from a spiritual, which has to do with agency, self-determination of African American people, how African Americans were able to create, to survive first, then to create, and then thrive in many ways through our organizations, through our institutions, and the very basic institution, the extended Black family, because family is, as as you know, were torn apart during slavery and after slavery, into Reconstruction and the Jim Crow era. There were pressures on Black families, and it was very difficult to keep Black families together, but African Americans found ways to do that. And the extended Black family was one of those fundamental institutions that helped Black people to survive.
We have another item in the Transcription Center that's actually shared by Anacostia Community Museum Archives right now, which is Bladensburg Union Burial Association minutes, which I think is a really great representation of an organization that was coming together regionally, but also trying to take care of and support members of the community. Maybe another example of something you'd like to check out in the Transcription Center. Do we have any other questions coming through right now? Okay, well, thank you so much, Tulani, for everything that you've shared today. I think that this is, for many people, a great starting point on James Baldwin. If you don't know more about James Baldwin, you really should do more research, take the opportunity to learn more about his impact and influence, and also, of course, in fall 2016, come and see many of his items in the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Oh, we have one more question coming in. Oh, so what is your favorite item that's been shared in this collection that's in the Transcription Center? And if you had to pick one to read first, which one would you recommend?
Probably, maybe we have, well, my favorite book, I would say, is Nobody Knows My Name. In undergraduate school, I was an English major, and literature, African American literature, studied that as well. And I was introduced to James Baldwin during that time. And so I have at my home, you know, a collection of almost all of Baldwin's books, and Nobody Knows My Name is one of my favorites, and probably because it speaks to the issue of human identity, and that was a big topic for Baldwin, because it's just so critical to understand all of these other social, political, and economic issues and their interconnectedness to the human being, just being human in that particular struggle. So that's one of my favorites. What to read first? I would start with his essays. His essays are excellent, and in fact, some people consider him, many critics, consider him a much better essayist than novelist. So his essays would be great.
They're streaming in now.
Oh boy.
Got one. Yeah, I'll read it to you. So we have a question is, and I think we've touched on this a little bit, but really would love to hear more about your thoughts on why you think Baldwin is so very relevant today.
He's absolutely relevant today because there hasn't been a lot of progress since the time he was writing. Some of the same issues that Baldwin grappled with, we're still grappling with today. So his perspective needs to be revisited because, you know, it remains essential.
This is changing the subject quite a bit, but the question is, how do museums decide what to digitize? And maybe some of the decision-making factors relate to publications, exhibits, and other elements as well.
Yeah. Sometimes we digitize items that were not in the inaugural exhibition, right? So we wanted, another platform, if you will, to be able to present these items to our audience, and for people who may not physically come to the museum.
One thing that was very different about the Baldwin collection in the Transcription Center, as opposed to other items in the Transcription Center, is frequently other items are maybe a single bound volume. And this was an opportunity it was an amazing opportunity as a volunteer to really be in a mini exhibit, to be able to see a period of time, changing work, emotion, interaction, social connection that was coming through these particular items.
Yes, that's true too. And as you were talking, came to mind also that we digitize items that are fragile too. Certain items that we don't want handled anymore, ever. We digitize them, and then that way people are able to literally flip through, a book in digital format that they can't physically handle anymore.
And then one of the knock-on benefits, of course, of it being digitized is that we can bring it forward to the Transcription Center, create text from that, and then make that text searchable. So as a researcher, you're able to dive deeper into items and see relatedness using the text of the items across Smithsonian collections as well. Well, I think that if you have more questions, please do send them into us. We'll find some ways to get you answers after the fact. Thank you again, Tulani, for spending the time with us today. And I know that we've learned about James Baldwin today and his items that are going to be in the Making Away Gallery. And we have another set of materials from entrepreneurial background, which is the Poro College collection, a series of documents and letters that will be released probably within the next half an hour for those people who want to transcribe. They're released now, so you can come to the Transcription Center, which is https://transcription.si.edu, and you can look in the National Museum of African American History and Culture section, and you'll be able to find that item. In that space as well, if you tick a little box that says include completed items, you'll be able to see the other materials that have been shared so far, which include Baldwin's collection, Prentice Albrier's scrapbooks, which are fantastic, as well as some other items relating to the history of slavery in the United States. So once again, thank you all for joining us, and for completing this project and making Baldwin's collection more easily searchable within our Smithsonian systems. Hopefully what you've learned you can take forward into your lives, your classrooms, and your discussions, and then share back with us again. And again, please do share your reflections. Tell us other ways and other items that you'd like to see in the Transcription Center or digitized. And we look forward to having you join us in person in fall 2016 as the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture opens to the public.
Thank you.
Thank you.